never any doubt in my mind that he was responsible, because there was only 3 people there that day, and that was the little girl, the daughter, Lainie and Lewis, and there's no way in the world she was ever in that tree. Not that day.
You've shown no remorse or apologised for her death.
Killer narcissists.
He was the last person to see her after they had an argument at their family home.
We had a bit of an argument in regards to the store figures.
He kept tripping up because he thought he was invincible.
Expert abusers.
Very deliberate manipulation to make her think that she's nuts.
The same strategies.
He used to call her princess.
The same traits.
A grandiosity, an entitlement, a lack of empathy.
And it's never their fault.
Mental illness called her death, not me.
As incidents rise,
more women are being murdered by their partners than ever before.
Yeah, you disposed of her in an undignified way.
And sentences don't.
Women as victims have such low status, even when they lose their lives.
They are dangerous and they will remain dangerous.
We investigate why,
dumping her over a ledge to leave her lying in mud,
these criminals continue.
Boris, did you kill Karen?
To be underestimated.
I've got nothing to say to you.
Introducing Kiss and Kill. Episode 3. Louis James Mahony. I'm Alison Sandy.
Gerry, so good to see you.
A rural town of just under 4,000 people in southwest Queensland, which was unseasonably cool for our autumn visit. This is where Lainie, who was just 36 at the time, was found face up at the base of a large gum tree on the 29th of August, 2009. A large gaping wound at the back of her head.
Mahony told police he was asleep and was woken by a thud when Miss Coldwell fell from a ladder while removing decorative lights. She died 2 days later in a Brisbane hospital from severe head injuries.
The couple had been together since their late teens and shared a 3-year-old daughter, Dakota, who Mahony said was napping at the time of the incident. In our last case, you saw how police worked together to catch a killer.
It looked staged to me. I went to the police station and there was no CIB there and the inspector wasn't there. And I said to a uniformed fellow, I said, you better tell them to check this out, check the insurance out, because that didn't happen like he's saying. And then nothing happened.
But what if you're the only one who believes it's murder?
I said, the Lainie Cole thing, and he said, yep. And I said, well, you want to have a good look at it, because it didn't happen like that. And he just said, yeah, because she was an habitual tree climber and the pathologist could say that she fell 6 to 8 metres from a tree and landed on that rock and done that injury. Our hands were tied. And that was it.
That's how it was for Gerry Thornton.
So then I never got involved until November 2011.
Who wouldn't give up, even though following his gut instinct meant disobeying orders.
Hello.
Hi, Gerry.
How you going, Alison?
Good, how are you?
I caught up with Gerry over the phone before heading to Charleville.
There was never any doubt in my mind that he was responsible, because there was only 3 people there that day, and that was the little girl, the daughter, Lainie and Lewis, and there's no way in the world she was ever in that tree. Not that day.
This episode isn't just about Louis Mahony, but the person who put it all on the line to ensure he was brought to justice, and what it cost him.
So what made you want to join the police force?
Well, that was funny, because ever since I was a kid, my dad wanted me to join the police force, and he wanted to be a policeman, but because he was a haemophiliac, he couldn't join.
For those of you who don't know, haemophilia is a disease where the blood doesn't clot.
So he always wanted me to, but I never had any intentions of doing it. And then I played football for brothers in Brisbane, and Wayne Bennett was there then. And Wayne Bennett was tied up with the Queensland Police, so he was encouraging us to join. I was talking to a mate one day and he was filling out an application. He said, you may as well have a go too. And I sort of said, well, I can't because of my shoulder. And he said, oh, well, no harm in trying. And you wouldn't believe it, I got in and he didn't.
Upon graduating from the academy in 1987, Gerry was stationed at the Gold Coast for 5 years.
And done some CIB work there, and then was in the CIB at Gatton. And then a good friend of mine, he's a superintendent in charge of CIB down at Gold Coast, and asked me to go out to Charleville with him. So I ended up going out there and working with him out there for the next 3 years or so. And then, I applied for the CIB job there, the sergeant's job, but I was told I was too inexperienced. And I'd already done a really good job at Gatton with a sexual predator, and apparently they didn't think that was enough. So, I decided, well, I'll go back to being uniform, and I bought a cattle property, and I've been doing both ever since.
That cattle property made all the difference to Gerry because policing wasn't his only source of income. He took up at a two-man station in nearby Morven, a much smaller town with a population of less than 200. But it wasn't until he was seconded to the Charleville CIB, that's the Criminal Investigation Bureau, that he launched himself into Lainie's case.
The majority of the people of the town thought that he either did it or was involved in her death, yeah.
Just weeks before Lainie died, Louis Mahony organised a $1.5 million life insurance policy. His lawyers then sought to claim it days later, but the insurer, Westpac Life, refused to release the funds until a result from the coronial inquest. That never happened though, as the case had been initially written off as non-suspicious, and QPS picked it up again after new evidence uncovered by Gerry. All up, the insurance policies for Lainie's death amounted to $2.25 million. Lainie had also taken out her own insurance policy worth $750,000 shortly before her death. Unbeknownst to Mahony, the beneficiary was her mum, Patricia, not him.
Well, I know he was pretty keen to collect his insurance. He was making inquiries about that. I met him once. I spoke to him on the phone a few times. He rang me up to see how the investigation was going. Very personable, very smooth and convincing. But then when you talk to other people, it was, very money-driven. Would basically tell you anything, wasn't all that truthful, and always appeared to be someone that he wasn't. He always wanted to be someone a bit bigger and a bit better than what he was.
But Gerry couldn't just rely on his gut instinct. Lainie's family was right behind him, but it was a long time until he could convince not just the police, but the coroner that he was right, the latter of which had also written it off because there was nothing in the police file to suggest foul play.
It was a battle, and a real battle for the next 2 years. And I wasn't allowed to travel to take statements or anything like that. So all the statements I took, a large majority of them were taken over the phone. And then it was, emailing backwards and forwards and, adding, deleting or whatever to get statements. So that made it hard. I ended up getting into bed with the insurance company because the police weren't going to provide any funds. So I asked for a pathology report, pathology review, because the initial review was very sketchy. And that was flatly refused. So then I got onto the insurance company, and they were good enough to pay for Professor Joe DeFlo to provide his opinion. And he basically said exactly what I'd been saying, is that there'd been a scuffle and she'd been hit in the back of the head with an iron. And I presented that to the police. They still weren't interested.
So Gerry went back to the insurance company, which agreed to develop a replica skull so the accident theory could really be tested.
It was basically, you just had to keep digging, like the organ donor. They come out and said, basically, there's no way in the world they could have used her organs if she'd have fallen 6 to 8 metres. In the early days, after I listened to the 000 call, every other version he had was that she was lying on her back with her head on the rock. But he tells the 000 call, the operator, that she's lying face down. I played that to a senior police officer and he goes, that doesn't mean anything.
But Gerry also needed to understand the type of person Louis Mahony was, and the best information on that came from the people who worked with him at Western Exporters Abattoir. I went for a drive with Gerry to check it out.
You got to remember, Louis was a butcher by trade. He'd done his apprenticeship in his dad's butcher shop. So he was always going to get a job fairly easy at the abattoir.
Yeah. Okay, so there seems to be quite a lot happening with. He's a bit of a ladies' man, as mentioned before, and I mean, several girlfriends, or was he always just cheating on Lainie? I mean, obviously this wasn't well known at the time necessarily, or is that what the abattoir workers said?
With the abattoir workers saying that he was constantly flirting with the workers, the female workers out at the abattoir.
And they were part of his alibi at one stage, weren't they, or part of his case?
Yeah, 3 of them were part of his alibi, because the whole thing with the 1.5 million insurance policy was that the person who's taking the policy out has to be in front of the computer. And Lainie was at work. So he said that there was 6 or 7 people that would give statements to say that she was in front of the computer and that she'd knocked off work early, but talked to the 2 supervisors that were on duty that day, and that, they gave statements saying no, she never left.
Gerry is referring to Mahony falsely claiming Lainie was present when he took out the $1.5 million insurance policy. What else did you find out from them?
Yeah, like you had your Australian workers, your locals, who weren't a fan of Louis. Like, they loved Lainie, but they weren't a fan of Louis. They despised him. Whereas the Asian workers didn't have a lot to do with them, except for the ones who were virtually saying that Lainie was in front of the computer when the policy was taken out. But the European, Australians, whatever you want to call them, locals, they did not like Louis one bit, and they were very forthcoming about his behaviour, about his standover tactics, and one even said that Louis said to him one night that he was thinking about killing Lainie because she was going to leave and take his little girl, and that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So there was some pretty good statements there.
Well, you also got the indication of how money hungry he was them too, right? Is that from them?
Yeah, he told. Yeah, look, anyone he had contact with, he told how much money he was going to get, and he really took delight in telling people that the police had cleared him, which was true. They had cleared him. So he kept on telling people that he was set for life financially, and that the police had cleared him, and no more worries.
I know we touched on this before, but why did he, was he stupid? Because it seems to me that if you were going to kill your wife, A, you wouldn't tell anyone, and B, you wouldn't give your motive away.
I think all through this, he overestimated his ability. I think he kept tripping up because he thought he was invincible. And you got to admit, those first few months he had a pretty good run. No one questioned him. So his confidence is sky high, and I think he was a little bit disappointed that people didn't recognise sort of what a good job he'd done. He used to actually boast to some of the workers here about, just little hints, and he actually said to Rae-Anna, Coldwell, Lainie's niece, she was going for a job interview, and she worked here on the floor, and where she was, she couldn't move, so on the chains or whatever they call it. He came up and said, don't worry about it, just do what I did when I was getting ready for the insurance man. And he actually said he practiced in the mirror for so many weeks, I think it was like 7 weeks, a long time before Lainie died. And with his overconfidence, just giving little hints, and to say that you've been practicing for 7 weeks when she hadn't been dead 7 weeks.
So at any time, Was there any indication that he had any guilt, any remorse, anything, any feeling?
No, and like if you look through the file and see how remorseful he was at her memoriam, there was nothing there. But you know, when I first got the job, you look through it and he was crying. But when you asked each individual, did they see tears? None of them saw tears. You talk about whether he suffered any grief. Lainie died on the 25th. On the following Monday, they had a service at the crematorium in Toowoomba at 8 o'clock, and she was cremated at 9. That was really unusual for a cremation to happen at that time, particularly when there was no other cremations booked in that day at that crematorium. It was a discount coffin, a discount funeral service, no flowers.
So your determination was based purely on the fact that you knew it couldn't have happened the way he said it did?
Yeah, like, I knew right from the word go that it was wrong. Then one day I managed to have a sneak peek at the scenes of crime photos, and the thing that really struck me was that there was no blood. That really surprised me, and when I first started the job, I rang up the head paramedic, and he agreed with me. There was no blood there. And another thing was there was no scuff marks. Like when you're kids and climb trees, you get, like, the bark makes a scuff mark on you, and she's allegedly fallen out of this tree, and there wasn't one scuff mark. There was no scratches, like on her arms, on the legs. And then I seen a reenactment where the detective, he's looking up in the tree with his diary above his head shielding the sun, and he puts his hand on the tree, and it's been videoed, and then he goes, oh, that's a weird texture, and takes his hand away, but the camera doesn't pick it up. So then I went in search of lemon-scented gum trees, and that's when I discovered they got this white powder. She should have been covered in white powder.
Where did all the blood go? Did he hose it off the concrete, or was it inside on the lino, do you think? I mean, does it work with both of those places, that he could have got rid of the blood?
He had access to a very powerful acid or agent that the abattoir uses for washing down the floors. The Coldwell family believed that within a couple of days of Lainie's death, that gym area had been washed out with this powerful cleaning agent.
Okay. So when you say the gym area, you mean out near the old shed?
Yep.
No, I was wondering about that, because we all know how much head wounds bleed.
Yeah, well, I just believe that's probably where most of the blood was.
And he wiped her face, because otherwise it would have indicated that she was face down rather than face up. Yeah,
and I think you could see that because of the cut to her chin, that it didn't bleed.
Back at the house, Gerry demonstrated what he meant. So, Gerry, how do you think Lainie was killed? What's the likely scenarios?
Well, I suppose you can only assume what happened, but he says that they got home at 10:30 that morning from the mother-in-law's house, Paddy's house, and he said they spoke outside about life. And then he talks about 11:30, I think he says they come in to make each other lunch. But at 12:05, Lainie makes a call on the landline that lasts 2 seconds to her mother's house, and that's terminated, and then she makes another call that doesn't even last a second. Now, I believe that he's exercised some sort of control over to prevent her from making those calls, and I think that's the only natural assumption you can make. And then they've moved to the hall. I believe he's already got possession of the iron, which would he picked up over here at the doors. I'd say he's got possession of the iron, so whether it's voluntary or by force that Lainie's moved towards the hall.
Just to clarify here, the iron was used as a doorstop to keep it open.
I'm more inclined to think that the actual assault or attack occurred on the cement because of the abrasions. But in saying that, when the new owners purchased the house, the air conditioners hadn't been fixed, but new lino had been placed in the hall. So it might be coincidence, but I tend to think that the main assault happened out here.
What were her main injuries there, Gerry?
She had a circular abrasion here, which was a reasonable abrasion, minor abrasions here, and she seemed to have a mark on her nose and also a cut under her chin, which didn't bleed apparently, whereas usually chin cuts bleed fairly well.
And on her limbs?
Yeah, well, she had angular gouge marks in her right arm, several of them, and one in her left arm. Her right hand was swollen, and then the major injury to the back of her head.
And on the elbow?
She had like a hematoma on her right elbow.
Okay, so what did that indicate to you? What were these wounds? What caused these wounds?
To me, she's landed on the elbow, face down on the cement, and he's struck her on the back of the head. And to me, these were defensive wounds where she's had her hands up trying to protect her head.
Gerry later reflected on the embellishments Mahony added to his story.
And it's funny, I took a warrant out in front of to a magistrate here, and he reckons that was the most preposterous thing he'd ever seen in a search warrant application, that someone would say that.
Say what?
That they'd only had sex earlier in the gym area.
Well, why was he trying to say that?
I reckon DNA.
Despite doing so much work on the case, when QPS finally decided to pursue a murder charge, they left him out of the loop.
No, because they arrested him in Brisbane. They didn't tell me.
After his arrest in 2015, Louis Mahony faced a committal hearing in Toowoomba. Gerry said Mahony acted like he thought he was a rock star, even posing for a photo.
Just never seen where they were allowed to go around the back and take a photo before. And I'm not sure if it was on the front page of the local paper, but yeah, I know the family wasn't really impressed with it because that's what it was like, and he was smiling for the camera. And,
Do you remember how his demeanour and everything?
Oh, I suppose smug, arrogant, he's just very, very confident person.
Gerry suggests Mahony was a bit of a fantasist.
When I first started to look into this job, I contacted a superintendent in the Northern Territory Police, and he told me that with Queensland Policing, if you've got another job, you've got to put an application in to the superiors for secondary employment. He actually went to the trouble of doing that and sent it in to this superintendent saying that he'd been selected as the captain of the Australian archery team and that he's receiving, and I've got an idea, $500,000 American sponsorship, and he wanted approval for that. None of which ever happened, and easy to disprove, but that's what he did.
Mahony remained on remand until his murder trial in 2017. During that time, daughter Dakota was a preteen and living with his family.
Friends and family of the 44-year-old were in court to support him on the first day of the trial. Mahony is accused of murdering Lainie Coldwell in 2009 and trying to make it look like an accident. He pleaded not guilty to Miss Coldwell's murder. Prosecutor Carl Heaton argued it was extremely unlikely that she wouldn't have any other injuries from the fall. Mahony also faces several charges of attempted fraud after allegedly taking out life insurance.
During the proceedings, the jury heard from experts, friends and family.
Well, Lainie and Louis used to live in Charleville and we had quite regular contact. I treated Louis like an uncle because we grew up with Louis being our uncle, and so Christmases, birthdays, he was always there, as Lainie was.
All right. Now, I want you to cast your mind back to August of 2009, and particularly the 23rd of August 2009. You essentially, you first saw the ambulance making some movements around Charleville, and as a result of some inquiries, then got some information and then went to the hospital in Charleville.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, let's pick it up from there. What happened when you arrived at the hospital in Charleville?
So I think I met Mum and Dad outside, and they told me that they said Lainie had an accident. She'd fallen out of the tree. And then I went inside.
Who was inside?
There was Nan and Joan, Louis, Mum and Dad, myself and Dakota.
All right, particularly Louis, what observations did you make of him at the hospital?
He was sitting in a chair in outpatients with his head in his knees, with his knees up. He was crying and sobbing. I didn't really pay too much attention to him. My focus was Dakota.
Did you essentially grab Dakota and take her outside?
Yep, I did. I tried to remove her from the situation.
All right. And then did you return back to the hospital?
Yeah.
What did you observe about Louis on that occasion when you were at the hospital?
He may have gotten up and moved around and done that sort of stuff, but he was still just had the same behaviours.
All right. Then you said you went outside.
Yes.
What happened?
Then I sat in the back of my dad's X-Trail with Louis and Robert, and Louis showed me photos of Lainie while she was up the tree. And Louis told me that she was up the tree on Saturday, the day before, so he showed me 2 photos.
All right. How did he show you those photos?
They were on his phone, and his comments were she was up the tree yesterday. He then proceeded to show me the photos.
What did you see in those photos?
I don't recall a lot. I remember seeing a tree, obviously, and Lainie in the tree. I think there was a part of the house or so in that tree in that photo.
And doing the best you can to remember, what can you say in terms of where the photographer was in relation to where Lainie was in the tree?
So Lainie was facing towards the photographer, but I'm not too sure what angle she was in relation to the house or anything like that.
And what about where the photographer was in terms of...
I'm not too sure where they were standing. They were either on the ground or a bit higher up. I can't recall.
Now, before we move away from that, do you recall a phone call being made?
Yes.
So what do you remember about that?
Louis said whilst on the phone, "It's your fucking fault. You wanted the lights out of the tree."
Okay, so was Louis there? Louis was on the phone in your presence?
Yes, that's correct.
And you heard him say that
Yes.
to the phone?
Yes.
And you don't know who he was talking to?
No, I believe it was his mother.
All right, what were you able to observe of his demeanour at that stage of the day? So whilst you're outside?
While we were outside, he'd actually started to calm down, and he wasn't hysterical crying. He was upset, but he wasn't being hysterical and crying.
Okay, now you told us that you were sitting in the back of the car and chatting with him. You told us about the photographs. What else did he say to you?
I don't recall much more of the conversation in the back of the car.
Did he tell you anything about what had happened with Lainie?
Just that she'd fallen out of the tree and didn't go into any further details. So once he got back to hospital with his belongings, he was just sorting through his stuff. He didn't have any clothes at all, just photographs of Lainie, and pretty much that was all that was in his suitcase.
Okay, did you then travel to Brisbane?
Yes.
And you then next saw Louis at the hospital in Brisbane?
Yes.
All right, now just in a general sense, describe for us what was going on at the hospital when you arrived in relation to Louis.
Yeah, so we're in a room, like the family support room. He was sitting in the corner most of the time on his phone. Sometimes he'd be quite upset, other times he was fine, just playing on his phone. We come out of the room at one point and he was having a conversation. So he told me that they'd made love 2 hours before the incident. So that's about it.
All right, now after Lainie had died, can I ask you to cast your mind back to the events that transpired after that? So back in Charleville, at that time you worked at the meatworks in Charleville.
That's correct.
As did Louis?
Yes.
Now, can you just again, in a general sense, describe for us the type of contact and frequency of contact you ordinarily would have with him at work on a day-to-day basis?
On a normal day, because I obviously knew Louis as my uncle, we would talk quite often, and that didn't stop after.
Did he speak with you about the events of the 23rd?
Yes, on quite a few occasions.
All right. What do you remember?
So this was over a period of time. He told me that he picked her up and dropped her, and he couldn't give her CPR, that she was pregnant, and that he had a copy of the autopsy and pathology reports to say that she was pregnant. He would mimic and describe the noises she was making while she was laying there dying.
Describe what he was actually doing. What words would you use to describe the physical actions?
He would basically try and make the noises she was making while she was dying, and he said that they were gurgling. She was gurgling. You couldn't give CPR because she had stuff on her face, like branches and blood.
When he was telling you these things about Lainie on the 23rd, what do you observe of his demeanour?
He would tell me in a smart type of way, and then at the end of the conversation act upset, like be upset, and then just walk away and leave it as an open-ended conversation. It felt to me
Don't tell us how. Just describe what you observed of him.
It was when he was telling me most of the time he was cool and calm and collected. Other times he would get upset.
Can you give us some context to these conversations you had? How did the subject matter come up in discussion?
I worked on the chain, so in positions where I couldn't necessarily walk away from what I was doing, and Louis would just come up and start these discussions without any prompting from myself.
Okay, is the chain where the carcasses are being dealt with?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, now you've started to tell us about a conversation about an interview.
Yes, so I was going to Rockhampton for an interview with the CQU, and Louis said to me that the key to an interview is practice. Practice in the mirror, and he told me that he'd been practicing the interview with the insurance company for 7 weeks. And that was strange to me because Lainie hadn't been dead for 7 weeks.
What's the best you remember as to when that conversation was had?
I don't remember what time it was, like 5 or 6 weeks after she died.
All right. What else did he say to you about the interview with the insurance company?
He said that he could have the insurance guy charged because he basically accused Louis of killing Lainie.
Another person who knew of Louis's affairs was his boss at the abattoir, Neil Duncan.
Tell us your full name, please.
Neil Graham Duncan.
All right. Now, Mr. Duncan, in 2009, were you the company director of Western Exports?
I was.
And that, we've heard, is an abattoir.
That's correct.
A goat abattoir.
That's correct.
All right. Did you know a person by the name of Louis Mahony?
I do.
And did you know a person by the name of Lainie Coldwell?
I did.
Can you tell us how you came to know Louis Mahony?
Louis Mahony used to work for me on 2 different occasions at the abattoirs.
When did he first start working?
His first employment at Western Exporters was 1999, which lasted over 2 years. And the next employment was 2007 until basically the death of Lainie.
Let's focus on the second period of employment from 2007 through till 2009. What role did he perform?
He was a supervisor for the kill floor.
Okay, so in a very general sense, can you explain what that meant in terms of his responsibility?
Well, his responsibility was to supervise the slaughter floor and the people that actually operated on that slaughter floor.
All right. Now, what about Lainie Coldwell? How did you come to know her?
Well, she was the partner of Louis. She was also employed by Western Exporters, firstly as a cleaner, and then on the administration staff in the office.
On a day-to-day basis, did you have direct contact with Louis Mahony?
On a day-to-day basis, pretty much. Well, you could say every hour. I was responsible for, of course, the overall management of it, which is involved in managing the supervisors and dealing with the day-to-day problems and issues that may occur.
In the year prior to Lainie dying, Neil Duncan refers to a conversation he had with her while she was painting his house.
She asked me whether Louis was having an affair, and I told her, ask no questions and you'll get told no lies.
And do you remember when that was?
Well, I'm not sure.
What about in relation to her death in August 2009?
Well, it was probably 6 months prior to that because it took a few months, whatever, to paint the house. And it was at that stage she was doing the painting, she asked me that particular question.
Okay, how did that conversation develop?
That was it. She asked the question and I answered it. And there's no more.
You said you knew the answer to that question.
Yes.
If you were to answer that question truthfully, what would it be?
I knew Louis was playing around. I wouldn't say he was having an affair. He was just playing around.
You were aware of a trip that he made to Sydney?
Yes.
All right, tell us the circumstances of that trip. How was it organised? And what did he speak to you about in relation to that trip?
He came into my office and told me he wanted to go to Sydney to meet up with a Korean girl. Yeah, he wanted to go to Sydney to meet up with this girl. He wanted me to organise it if I could, as a favour. Put the airfares through the company too, and he would pay that off in lieu of overtime.
And did he explain why he wanted it done that way?
He said that if he took it, or if we took it out of his account or his wages as a wage deduction, Lainie would see it and get suspicious.
Okay, so did you agree to do that for him?
Yes.
All right. Do you know how the flights and the accommodation and that sort of thing were organised and paid for then?
It probably would have been done through Western Travel. Now, though, I'm not sure whether Louis or the office girls had organised that.
But how was payment made for the accommodation and the travel?
Well, Western Travel just booked the company out.
Okay, so it was paid for through the company.
Yes.
The company paid the invoices, and then the arrangement was that Louis would reimburse the company discreetly.
Yes.
Well, I'll ask you this. Was there ever any other occasions when there was a trip like that?
Apparently there was another trip a bit later on, after probably 3 or 4 weeks, I think. Probably 2 to 3 months prior to Lainie's death. I couldn't be exact with the times.
Did he speak with you about that second trip?
Well, I'm not sure.
Well, after one or both of those trips, did you have a conversation with Louis about Lainie?
Louis one morning, came into the office and told me that Lainie had spat the dummy. I asked him why, and he said the words to the effect that, "I think she knows," or something along those lines. He said she's transferred $200,000 out of our joint account. She wants the house at Dundee and the car and the boat. I told him he needs to get it sorted, otherwise he will end up losing the lot.
Did he tell you in that conversation what Lainie was intending to do?
Leave him.
Okay, did you revisit the subject in discussions with him?
Not to my knowledge.
All right, well, did you ever say anything more about what he'd discussed with you? The fact that Lainie was leaving him? Did you ever ask him anything more about it?
Well, in one conversation just after that, but that probably maybe a week. We had a conversation and he told me that he had it sorted.
Okay, did you have any other discussions with Louis about the nature of the relationship with Lainie?
Not that I remember.
Okay, all right. Can you cast your mind then back to the 25th of August of 2009? So that was the day that Lainie was formally declared to be dead?
Yes.
Did you receive a call from Louis?
Yes.
What do you remember about that call?
Louis called me. He said to me, "We've just turned off life support. Lainie's dead. I've been cleared by the police."
Did he say anything else about that?
No, that was it.
At that point, did you know what happened to Lainie?
Yes.
Had Louis told you that?
No.
Did he mention anything about what had happened to Lainie in that call when he said he'd been cleared by the police?
No.
Did he have some time off then after that?
Indeed.
Do you remember when it was that he returned to work?
About 2 weeks.
And after he returned to work, did you speak with him?
Yes.
And in particular, did you speak with him about life for him at that point in time, moving forward?
Well, I didn't speak to him in any great lengths or anything like that about Lainie's death. It was, a touchy subject. I didn't like talking about it, and I didn't want to bring it up.
Did you have any discussions with him about what he was going to do from there?
Well, he did. He did tell me that Lainie was insured, and he also on numerous occasions, and these conversations running 2-minute conversations in passing, but he did tell me that, what he was worth in value.
What did he actually tell you?
Well, he had insurance policies, $750,000 one and $500,000 one, and which was about $1.5 million, and his house up at Dundee Beach was worth $650,000 and so forth. And he said, "I'll probably be pretty right from now on."
Are those the words that he used?
Pretty much.
Did you ever speak with him about what had actually happened to Lainie on the 23rd?
At some point after that, he did tell me the basics of how he actually found Lainie.
What did he tell you?
He told me he took his daughter for a sleep at 12:04. He awoke at about 14 minutes past 1. He went outside and seen the ladder on the back of the ute, and he said his heart just dropped, and he seen Lainie sticking out from the side of the tree on the ground. He went over and tried to do something. He said it was a bit of a mess. He was covered in blood, and he was, screaming and whatever else. And then help arrived.
You say he went over and tried to do something. What did he say that he tried to do?
I can't remember what he said.
Did he ever explain to you what injury she had?
No.
Okay, are you able to give us some idea how often you had conversations with him about what had happened on the 23rd of August?
We spoke about it just in passing comments, because he would come into my office and just talk about something in relation to that, which would last maybe a minute or maybe 2 minutes, but, that could be 6 times a day.
Did a particular subject matter feature regularly in these discussions?
Well, with Louis, it was everything based on money.
Louis Mahony never gave evidence, but several forensic pathologists did.
Dr. Shirley Robertson was another pathologist who expressed the opinion that it was extremely unlikely that the deceased was injured in a fall from the tree to the rocks. She agreed that it was not impossible for someone to fall and not have another injury, but said it was extremely unlikely and it would depend on how the body landed. And she pointed out that the common instinct in a fall is for a person to land on outstretched hands, which would then be likely to show evidence of injury.
Justice Douglas summarised the evidence for the jury, which included the bloodstain analysis being consistent with Lainie Coldwell's body being handled and removed from the scene, and the iron found in the garden being the murder weapon.
The bloodstain pattern evidence observed on the iron was consistent with being initially created by dripped blood or contact bleeding on the tip of the iron and the rock, followed by blood flow due to gravity and satellite blood staining. Furthermore, the bloodstain patterns observed on the iron were consistent with them being created while the iron was in the position or a similar position that it was observed to be in the photographs.
Biomechanic experts also noted other injuries which would have been incurred had that happened. Here, Justice Douglas refers to evidence provided by Dr. Thomas Gibson.
When considering the possible trajectories of the fall, he assessed those based on where Miss Coldwell was said to have ended up, and reached the view that it was possible to see various ways to line up such a fall with the end position, but in the end the injuries then did not match the expected injuries from such a fall, except with the head injury.
For those of you who have listened to the Truth About Amy podcast, you'll recall Dr. Gibson also gave evidence for the Amy Wensley case. Justice Douglas then turned to the case for the prosecution, provided by Carl Heaton, now a Queensland District Judge.
Louis Mahony then had a problem. His wife was leaving him, he was deeply in love with another woman and anticipating life with her. He risked losing his daughter and half of his accumulated wealth if Lainie left him. He submitted to you that it was unlikely that Lainie fell accidentally from the tree, thus providing the answer to his problem. In addressing the issue whether Lainie fell or sustained the injury otherwise and was placed in the position under the tree where she was found when ambulance officers and Mr. Sullivan arrived, he asked you to look at all of the evidence and conclude that Louis engaged in deliberate actions to mask his plan to kill her and lied about his motive to kill her. He submitted to you that the only reasonable explanation was that he killed her. The prosecution did not have to prove that it was the iron. A pointed shape was required, and in that context the iron is the most likely candidate.
Mahony's several affairs were mentioned, including his latest one with Mira Park. Like the others, it didn't last. He did remarry, though, prior to being arrested for murdering Lainie, but to another Australian, not a Korean.
Louis's version of the fall from the tree had some pieces that fitted, he said, such as Lainie's willingness to get into trees. In contrast to that, however, he pointed out that the evidence suggests that she was capable, meticulous and thorough, and not an idiot, and did not take unnecessary risks. Louis, as a former police officer, would know how to address a possible criminal investigation. A strike to the back of the head made sense in the circumstances because it would have the benefit of surprise. Louis then tried to persuade people of his story, adding false detail from time to time, which led some people to notice inconsistencies, such as a lack of genuine tears and his focus on the potential gain from the insurance policies, rather than Lainie's death.
The mother of Lainie Coldwell has told a court her daughter knew nothing about a $1.5 million life insurance policy taken out in her name.
Just some clarification here. According to court documents, Mahony quickly cashed in on Lainie's superannuation policy after she died and sold their property at Dundee Beach. And despite Lainie's mum Patricia being executor of her will, he took the boat and kept all her items, including jewellery, archery and gym equipment. Other key evidence presented by the prosecution and included in the summation by Justice Douglas was that Mahony undertook incriminating internet searches.
There were searches for poisons and accidental deaths on the computer at 4 p.m. on the 24th of June. Later, on the 15th of July 2009, there was a search for the words head injury and a phone call to the insurance company about self-inflicted injury, while on the 2nd of August 2009, there were searches for forensic science.
A witness also testified Mahony asked him about poisons shortly before Lainie died.
Lainie went to Dundee Beach in late July and returned on the 11th of August. It was clear that she planned to leave Louis and relocate there. They had topped up the loan to their mortgage and the bank took out a mortgage insurance policy. It was used partly to pay out their credit cards and inferentially to make Dundee Beach habitable. He submitted, therefore, that Louis then realised that Lainie had resolved to leave the relationship.
Ultimately, the trial proved Mahony was a liar.
Louis was open about the problem in his relationship with other people and showed little respect or affection for Lainie. He, however, flatly denied a relationship or affair, illustrating his willingness to lie. This is my suggestion. 1. Has the prosecution proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Louis Mahony killed Lainie Coldwell? If your answer to question 1 is no, Louis Mahony is not guilty of any offence. If you answer yes to question 1, go to question 2. Question 2 is, if Louis killed Lainie Coldwell, did he intend to kill her or cause her grievous bodily harm? If the answer is no to question 2, Louis is not guilty of murder but guilty of manslaughter. If the answer to question 2 is yes, Louis Mahony is guilty of murder. I'll now ask you to retire to consider your verdict.
On the 13th of November 2017, Louis Mahony was convicted of murdering Lainie Coldwell.
Stand up, Mr. Mahony. You've been found guilty of the murder of your partner of many years and the mother of your daughter. You've just heard the results of your crime on her family. Your conduct has no doubt affected your family tragically also. The wickedness of your crime and the apparent motives that caused you to commit it reflect deep shame on you. You are also someone who had been privileged to be a police officer and should have known better than most of the reasons why crime is punished, especially a crime of this nature. The only sentence the law imposes for such a crime is life imprisonment, and I sentence you to life imprisonment.
With a non-parole period of 13 years, Louis Mahony is eligible for release in 2 years' time.
Over the past 8 years, we have had to endure many rumours, lies and stories around the circumstances of her death. But the gravity and inconsistencies have been laid out in this court and the reality of what occurred have been made clear. Louis' philandering, pathological lies and narcissistic nature led him to inflict a brutal injury on Lainie, causing her death.
Mahony lost his appeal against the conviction in 2019 and is currently incarcerated in Woolston Correctional Centre. So what does Gerry say about Mahony being a killer narcissist?
From what I've learnt, yes. Like, as I said, I didn't know Louis, so I really can't give an informed opinion. But from what I've heard throughout that investigation, I've no doubt he was a narcissist. I think it's because he always, I don't know, not the centre of attention, but he always tried to promote himself as someone he wasn't.
If someone shows you who they really are, believe them.
Forensic criminologist Claire Furguson says Mahony appeared to try to cultivate a lovable larrikin persona.
Isn't it interesting how each perpetrator that we're talking about has this kind of persona that they seem to be almost actively cultivating? And his was kind of like, yeah, a bit of a buffoon that you could forgive for these bad behaviors because he's just kind of like a lovable idiot. But I think really behind closed doors, it was much more calculated than that.
Well, even the term ladies' man, right? It hasn't got a negative undertone or it doesn't have a negative connotation.
Yeah, when interestingly, I think for most ladies' men, ladies probably don't actually like them that much when they find out who they really are. It's sort of a term for men more than it is for women. I don't think women would think that's particularly complimentary.
No, it just dawned on me when I was thinking about it with Louis Mahony because, I mean, he had these women that were on the go. It wasn't just one woman, and obviously Lainie was in the way of that. But it wasn't, people knew about it, but it wasn't that which people had an issue with, I suppose, in the end. In the end, it was the fact that he was a cold-blooded killer.
Yeah, it's not seen as problematic to be a ladies' man, to be actively deceiving people around you, sometimes with help. I think we need to do better, right?
I don't know if you ever saw this, but Gerry, who was there for a lot of it, used to say that he never actually believed that they would convict him. He seemed to think that he would get off in the end.
Yeah, I think the self-belief is part of the manipulation that works for them. Like, if someone believes their own lies, they're much more convincing. But also remember that the tactics that these expert abusers use are tactics that they have honed and practiced often over a lifetime to manipulate people, not just women. Mm-hmm. And so they wouldn't use them if they weren't confident that it would work. So of course he's going to be confident, because this is his playbook that's always worked previously, and he's just now learning the hard way that those behaviors were not convincing.
Yeah. So when this happened, obviously, that was this whole idea that Lainie had fallen out of a tree, which didn't ring true.
One thing that I like about this case, or that I think is helps us think about coercive control and the way that these expert abusers try to conceal homicides, is the fact that the behaviors that they use are tailored towards this particular victim. So in this case, originally, people that knew Lainie and knew her to be, very independent, very able to do the things that she wanted. She wasn't going to wait around for somebody to help her. She would get up there and get the lights out of the tree if that's what she wanted. So staging the death scene to look like that was absolutely believable, because people thought that's something that Lainie would do. If she wanted those lights out of the tree, she would just get up there and do it. She's capable, why not? And I think that he knew that, and that's why this setup was convincing for as long as it was convincing.
Yeah, initially so, but also Lainie was smart enough not to take the risk.
Of course. She was smart enough not to take the risk with the ladder, but when you have someone who's well-practiced, highly manipulative, talking about how this makes sense for Lainie, it becomes very difficult to not believe that scenario, I guess. One thing that struck me as really interesting is that in this setup of how the scene was staged, there was built-in protection for Louis. So the way that he set it up, he had the ute parked in a particular way so that he wouldn't be seen when he was manipulating the body into the fall position. And all of that kind of worked with this, with the facade of she's set up this dangerous situation with the ladder in the back of this ute, and then she's fallen off tragically. And he used all of those things. So these behaviors become almost irresistible from his standpoint, right? Because they protect him and they go towards this facade that he's trying to portray to authorities and witnesses and everybody in the community.
And that seems to be a common trait.
Yeah.
For all of these, that there's an arrogance that they won't be tested, that what they say won't be tested.
It's interesting, right? Because what we know about, especially the ones that are concealed, like this case and like Jared Baden-Clay and Rostevsky, is that they don't actually do a lot of stuff to the evidence. They don't manipulate that much evidence. They manipulate people, and they're really good at that. So they don't actually have to do much to the scene. All they have to do really is be believable. And when they are, the people that they've convinced will actually fill in the blanks in the scene that the perpetrator didn't fill in, or the mistakes that they made. People that are manipulated will rationalize those for them. It becomes so powerful for these offenders as like something they're attracted to doing because they know they can be convincing to these witnesses and people that are involved.
Yeah, because I think the difference with this one that strikes me is the audacity of Louis Mahony.
Well, remember, he was previously a police officer. He knows how to talk the talk with police. He knows how the police investigation is going to work and who's going to show up and what they have to do. And he had a sort of built-in protection in the type of scene that he staged as well, because Lainie wasn't deceased straight away. So he's automatically removed from the situation, and in this other, if he was innocent, very high stress situation, which is at the hospital and her being medevaced and all of that stuff. So it becomes part of the situation that investigators have to deal with. And think about that this man is potentially under a huge amount of stress if he's innocent. And I think that offenders sometimes use that to their advantage. They know that police don't want to traumatize them any further than they have been already, and they manipulate that.
But it's very similar to Bait and Clay's. The walls were closing in, right? Lainie, like Alison, knew about the affair.
Yep.
The financial stress, the insurance policy. I mean, and the fact that it was around the same time, right?
And Lainie, again, was not a shrinking violet. We know that she wasn't going to walk away with nothing. She was going to stand up for herself and had been. She had a plan for how she was going to get out of the relationship, and obviously he did not want that plan to move ahead.
She must have been... Does it indicate that she's suspicious? Because she got the insurance policy out too, right? So a different one, So there seemed to be because the problem we always have, right, is when this happens, it's only the perpetrator left to explain the situation.
Tell the story, yeah.
But she had the insurance policy out, which indicates that she potentially knew what he was capable of.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it might have just been sort of normal estate planning, moving on without knowing she's going to move on without him. At the very least, it shows that she had a real imminent intention of moving away from the relationship, and they were not going to be a couple anymore. And that is a clear signal to him that those walls are indeed closing in or coming down, potentially. These behaviors that many of these perpetrators carry out, and a lot of them think that they're a criminal mastermind, and really what they're doing is pretty much crime scene staging 101 or domestic homicide 101. They're not special, they're not thinking of anything novel.
Why don't they seem to see any fault in their own behaviour? Even when they're having an affair, even if they admit it, there doesn't seem to be any sort of remorse.
Yeah, a lack of accountability.
Yeah.
I think that it's a sense of entitlement over controlling relationships, over controlling money, controlling women's bodies. And we see that in lots of other ways as well, not in necessarily violent relationships or not in intimate partner femicides, but where people have a sense of entitlement over other people's bodies, especially young women and girls.
So do they feel justified?
I think they absolutely feel justified in a lot of cases. We know from some of the research that when you look at offenders that have killed someone and you ask them how they feel in the moments after they've killed someone or they've fatally injured someone, they usually report that they feel panicked, that that remorse kind of floods in and they think, what am I going to do? Flee, whatever. When you look at abusers that kill their spouses, they report feeling relief. So the problem is gone. Okay. They're not panicked now. They're maybe even more clear-headed than they were previously because they've gotten rid of what they view as the source of all of their problems, and they feel justified.
Is it a part of their genetic makeup? Is it their mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's nature versus nurture type of question, right? But I think one thing that we have to be careful of is that we're not like pathologizing these types of behaviors. If you're saying it's because of a mental illness, then does that mean that they're not responsible or not accountable? Certainly sometimes offenders might say that. They might use that to minimize their accountability down the track. So we have to be really careful about, I think, how we think about personality disorders. And also, I mean, after the fact, once you've killed your spouse, it's much easier to see the behaviors as problematic, the past behaviors as problematic at that stage. The challenge for us and for people, researchers, people in relationships, everyone across the globe, is to be able to see those behaviors for what they are in the moment when they're actually happening before you get to something so extreme as murdering your spouse and trying to cover it up. Because by that stage, I mean, we know that there's something going on that's really bad and high risk, but we have to see it earlier.
I mean, again, it is very much a removing the problem, right?
It's like that woman is a roadblock to me being able to do what I want with this money or this property or this asset or whatever, in this most self-serving sort of way of looking at it. They're just removing the roadblock.
So, Claire, is the problem here the inability for the status of this sort of killing to be considered serious enough? Like, you know, a lot of the time the term crime of passion, right?
I really hate that term because we know all of the literature has been like screaming for a long time now that it's not about snapping or crimes of passion. These are calculated decisions that people choose to make. Sometimes they make them quickly, but they make them nonetheless. And often we know, especially the types of ones that we're talking about here, where there's concealment and detection avoidance behaviors, that these perpetrators have thought about this long in advance. Even if they didn't plan, I'm going to kill Claire on Tuesday, they had a plan nonetheless. So it's not a crime of passion at all. It's it's the most instrumental thing you can do. The homicide is a means to an end so that he continues to be able to control the things that he wants to control without this roadblock. They choose in the moment that killing her is better than this other path. Killing her now is less problematic than divorce, losing my super, losing access to my kids or control of my kids or whatever. They make that choice. And I think some of these perpetrators think about and tell victims sometimes, if it gets to this point, then I'll kill you.
Is this the case at the beginning? Or is it a case that they're always in a manipulative, you know, frame of mind that this is a means to an end?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably genuine feelings, but I wonder about, like, what's that positive feeling actually about? Are you feeling, is the perpetrator in the moments when the relationship is really good, are they feeling happy and satisfied and those like loved up feelings because they are loving being in control of this situation and all of the things that that's giving them? Or do they actually love this woman with all of her flaws and all of her vulnerabilities? And one of the things about I think is interesting about the timeline and how fast the relationships move at the beginning is that you seem to have this perpetrator who's in love with someone, love bombing and doing all those things, but they're in love with someone that they don't actually know. So what is giving them those genuine good feelings?
So when you break it down, though, and you think, I mean, is it a case that they strip away? Is it their like expert abuse? Is it one of those things to strip away that strength?
Yeah, and at that stage, in the beginning, that strength is something that the perpetrator is actually attracted to. And in the end, that strength becomes like the worst thing that the victim has done in asserting their power and saying, I'm not going to take it anymore. So it's really interesting, that change, that they were attracted to the strength in the first place and then they stripped it all away. And when it starts to come back,
they resent it.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if they're not going to be involved and they can't benefit from that strength anymore. And I think that that's part of the reason why they're able to behave so deliberately in the moments, before and after the homicide, is that they feel completely justified because of her supposed bad behavior.
What about the lying afterwards? What about the concealment and everything afterwards? What makes them feel justified at that?
Well, they've been doing it for a long time. They still feel justified in murdering the person. And I think that they think that other people would behave the same way if they were put in the same position. Like they've been pushed and pushed, and their homicidal reaction was the only reaction that was rational. When we know, of course,
that it's not normal.
Yeah, nobody behaves that way.
So they normalise their behaviour.
Yeah, they normalize, they feel justified, they feel relieved. They're able to fall back on that skill set that they've been using for usually their entire lives, these manipulative tactics that they've practiced over a lifetime. And they go back into it without much problem or thought.
While largely a circumstantial case, Mahony's deceit and lack of compassion appeared to be his ultimate undoing. No longer a rock star, this time he hid his face from the cameras.
Has just been found guilty of murdering his ex-partner Lainie Coldwell.
For Lainie's family, the fight continued. They lost the battle for custody of Dakota and had to fight to keep control of the insurance funds paid out to Lainie's estate that they said were intended for Dakota.
A further mention needs to go to Sergeant Gerry Thornton, Station Officer of Morven, who has devoted the past 8 years to ensure we have justice for Lainie. For this case would have remained cold and justice not served. We cannot thank Gerry enough for what he has done both professionally and personally for our family.
Gerry Thornton wasn't there that day, but he was definitely kept in the loop. While relieved, Gerry resented it having taken so long.
I didn't worry about going to the celebrations. That didn't interest me. Firstly, it was a job that should have been finalised, I believe, in end of 2012. There was plenty there to pinch him then. But it just dragged on and on, which wasn't fair to the family.
QPS never gave Gerry the credit he deserved. Eventually, though, his efforts were recognised, firstly receiving a district officer's certificate, then an assistant commissioner's award, and they promised to hold a local ceremony, but instead ended up posting it to him. In the end, he even got the commissioner's award, and undoubtedly a much bigger deal would have been made about it if he had done the investigation with QPS's permission. Then Commissioner Ian Stewart was unable to present it to him personally, but did ring Gerry to acknowledge his achievement and chatted with him for about half an hour. What made all the difference, though, was the feedback from Gerry's former colleagues.
One of the best comments that I got was from he was an inspector here, and that really did help to try and get it on the road. But when you're an inspector, you've got to be careful what you say too. It didn't bother me. I was a career high sergeant. I didn't care what they did to me, but for someone like that. But he sent me a text and said, "Congratulations, mate, that's the best job I've seen in 36 years of policing." So that really did mean something to me.
Every hidden homicide needs a champion, someone passionate, dedicated, committed. There's no doubt that Lainie Coldwell's death would still be considered an unfortunate accident and Louis Mahony would be walking free if it wasn't for Gerry Thornton.
When I joined the police, there was a few fellas you really looked up to, and basically that was the way they operated. And one thing I learned is you never want someone to be smarter than you. Like, you never want a crook to be smarter than you. And if you don't get him for that offence or get her for that offence, that means they've outsmarted you. So you want to keep going and going until you get them. And this was an obvious one.
Next week, we crossed the border to Newcastle, New South Wales, where the killer hunted down his former partner after being released on bail for the 8th time.
We are in a state of terrorism in Australia at the moment against women.
And how a mum has juggled her relentless pursuit for meaningful domestic and family violence law reform while raising her traumatised grandson.
You have to live with that. As a mum, I didn't keep her safe. I didn't succeed. And then I haven't succeeded with this. I haven't succeeded to get a good outcome for her either. And so that's a lot to have to reckon with.
If you would like to share any information on the cases we've mentioned or discuss a different intimate partner homicide, please contact us. Just email us at kissandkill@7.com.au or visit our website 7news.com.au/kissandkill. Check out our show notes for information about everyone you've heard in today's episode, but also links to various domestic and family violence charities which are making enormous headway in this space. If you're on Facebook or Instagram, you can follow us to see photos and updates relevant to the series. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to subscribe. Please rate and review our series. It helps new listeners find us. Presenter and executive producer, Alison Sandy. Sound design, Mark Wright. Assistant producer and video editor, Cassie Woodward. Graphic design and animation, Jason Blanford. Special thanks to Dr. Claire Furguson and Sherelle Moody. This is a 7 News production.